didn't actually have to put any money down. We used the rental money and the vendor finance to acquire the property. Nothing changed for us because we were living in the property that we were renting, and now we're living in a property that we owned. Hi, how you going? It's Paul Antonelli here. I've shared this story over the years with people, and I thought it'd be an interesting story to share how you can buy a house without actually having any money at all. Sounds ridiculous, but it's exactly what we did. I went through a bit of a process of buying the property. We're still in the property, and this was almost 12, 13 years ago. At that time, money was a little bit tighter, and it was very difficult running the business, growing the business. There was all sorts of things going on, but actually it didn't really stop me from buying a property. So one of the things that we do often when we look at wanting to do something, we'll sort of work out that it's not really possible. I don't have enough money, and that could be traveling, buying something, buying a house, investing, all sorts of things. And we simply make the assumption that because you don't have money, you can't do it. And it's not really true. Over the years, I've done so many things where I was really clear I wanted to do this. It was really necessary. I didn't get into the how I'm going to do it. At that time, I just go, no, it's important. It's what I actually need to be doing, or it's something I really want to do. And I don't let the fact that I don't have a resource or I don't have money stop me from doing it. And then you sort of find a way of making that work. That makes sense, so it's just a way of thinking. So I'm going to talk a little bit of detail about this house that we bought and how it unfolded. We needed to move closer to the city, so we started looking for a property, and we found this house that came on the market. It happened to be a house that I'd actually, when I was still doing property inspections, I'd done an inspection on, and so it was sold. It had been on the market and it was sold, but because of finance issues and all those sorts of things, the sale didn't happen, so it was still on the market. There's a couple of things I noted at that time, and this will make a difference on the marketplace. It wasn't a great time to sell property, right? So if it's a great time to sell property, and there's more buyers than there is sellers, the seller is in a strong position. That's what you would call really a seller's market. At that time, it was definitely a buyer's market. There was a lot of property on the market. It wasn't moving that much. So people were sort of like, happy to do some deals or more open to doing something a little less conventional. We found this house, which I'd already said I'd done an inspection on. The other thing I noticed when I inspected the house was had been empty for a long time, which is pretty unusual when you've got a house that can be generating income, but it's empty. So that tells you something. And what that told me was that the vendor, the person selling the property, didn't necessarily need the money from rent, and there might have been some other issues there as to why it wasn't being rented out. And so what had happened was we saw the property, had a bit of a look at it. We weren't really in a position to buy. We didn't have a deposit, couldn't really buy. It was a $600,000 property. So what I did was I talked to the agent, who I knew, the real estate agent. I said, we'd like to take an option out on this property. And we agreed on the price. And basically, we said we'll be in a position to buy it within 6 months' time. I want a 6-month option. We also then put a saying that we wanted to rent it. Because the house was empty, we wanted to rent it during that period. And there was a little bit of discussion, but in essence, we prepaid some rent, which was good. So the person selling the house had some cash in, which they didn't have before. And the option fee that I normally use an option fee, which is 1% of the purchase price, fairly standard option fee. So $600,000 option fee. And if I don't go ahead with the purchase, you lose the option fee. So that's the upside from someone selling a property saying, well, look, I've covered my cost. It's not going anywhere. They get to keep the $6,000, which can cover the cost of holding the property. Anyway, moved into the property, and after 6 months, we still weren't in a position to buy. It's built up a little bit of deposit, but weren't really in a position to buy the property. And so then I simply reached out and said, look, I'd like to extend that option for another 6 months. There was a bit of discussion, and it was agreed. Okay, fine. We'd actually moved interstate for getting one of my businesses moving, so we weren't here for a period of time. And so it worked. And they said, yeah, sure. We went another 6 months to 18 months, and then we were in a position to sort of looking at buying the property. The property market had moved a little bit, so the valuation of the property was a little bit higher than maybe the price we'd locked in. It was still very much a buyer's market, and we still weren't in a position, because if you think, we needed a 20% deposit, which is roughly about $120,000 for a $600,000 property, which we didn't have. We didn't have that. We had some money, but nowhere near that to be able to acquire the property. So then I got a little bit creative, and I found out why was it that the property had been empty. And what I learned was that because the person selling the property had lived in this property for all those years, when you have your own house, like what we call principal place of residence, it's not taxable. You don't get a capital gain. So when you sell that property, there's no capital gains. It's actually tax-free money. And they'd had the property for a number of years. It had gone up in value, and so they didn't want to pay tax. And when you start generating income from a property, then a proportion of the revenue that you get from selling the property is taxable. So they were a little bit concerned about how that was going to look and how that was going to play out, and it might have been an issue. So we sort of had a bit of a discussion, and because we'd been renting the property and we had an option in place, what we effectively did was agree that the rent I'd been paying over that period of time, which was close to $40,000 over 18 months, we'd actually form it as part of the sale process and increase the agreed price. So if you follow that, so straight away what's happened is I had the $40,000, I had an option on the property, and we'd agreed, both myself and the person selling the property, that the rent I'd paid to date would contribute to the deposit, and would effectively give me a deposit now and lifting price of the property. So the price of the property we agreed was $40,000 more, and we also agreed that we would settle on the property. But it still wasn't enough. And so then what I did is I talked to the seller and I said, would you like to do some vendor finance for me? Which is another normal process. And how would that work? And I said, look, if you can vendor finance me $80,000, and what that means effectively is I don't give them that $80,000, and we agree on a term and a payment process for that, maybe over a couple of years. And they'd agreed to do it. I had to pay interest on that. So effectively, what ends up happening is the rent that I paid, the $40,000 plus the 80 grand vendor finance, was $120,000, which was effectively the deposit, which is pretty good. So when I went out to raise money from the bank for the 80%, I actually had the deposit. The bank is obviously not, they don't really care how that works. They just knew that I was able to affect the transaction and I only needed to borrow 80%. Makes sense. So by doing that, then it's just understanding how this process works a little bit and everyone's motivation. So at the end of the day, we ended up buying the property, didn't actually have to put any money down. We used the rental money and the vendor finance to acquire the property. Nothing changed for us because we were living in the property that we were renting, and now we're living in a property that we owned. The key takeaways from the process is, one, whenever you're in a transaction, you're trying to do something, try to understand as fully as possible what the other person's motivations are, what their reasons for doing something or not doing something. So I already spent some time trying to seek to understand what the seller situation was, and that made me understand how we could create a bit of a win-win arrangement, which made sense. I was very clear on what I could do, what I couldn't do, and it works really well in a marketplace where it's ideally a buyer's marketplace, not a seller's marketplace. So everything was right for that, and I've done that a number of times. I've used options a number of times over the years. So it was a really good process where effectively we're able to acquire an asset which by the time we bought it, it had actually gone up in value. We still own that property today, and that property's more than doubled in value over that time. So it just sort of indicates how at that point in time it was the right scenario for getting something like that done, which means effectively if it was a different marketplace and the seller wasn't as motivated for those specific reasons, it may not have been able to happen. So it's just something I'd really encourage you to do when you're thinking about doing something. Don't think about how necessarily you need to do it. If you want to do something, think about what's possible and how you'd like to do it, and then then think about how you're going to do it, rather than going, well, I can't really do it, I don't have any money, I don't have time, I'm not sure how that would work, because then you just don't move forward, you stop doing something. And so that's been a bit of a philosophy for me. If there's something I want to do, I just decide I'm going to do it, and then work out the details later, and creativity sort of comes into play, and you'd be amazed how things unfold, so that the universe sort of conspires to drive and help you achieve the objective you're trying to achieve. So yeah, so there's a bit of an insight into how you can get things done even though you don't have money. Just have to get a little bit creative, and you just have to understand what's happening around the place. So when I look at it, the more I can understand someone I'm dealing with or someone I'm negotiating with, how can I come up with a win-win arrangement where they win and I win? That's the optimum outcome, I believe. So I'm not into I'm going to take advantage of someone's situation. It's not really the way I work. For me, it's the best outcome is one where there's a win-win and we both win and we both have an ideal outcome. Thanks for listening in, and I'll catch up with you in another video that I'll put together on something else. Ciao for now. Thanks for listening. As you know, we grow organically. It's really people like yourself that enable us to get the word out. If you like what you hear, please give us a rating, leave a good comment, and share this with your friends. Thank you.